Good evening, everybody. My name is Matteo Moran. I am the Director of Advancement here for First Things Magazine. Welcome, all of you. Thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with our publication, we are America's leading publication on religion and public life, started in 1990 by Richard John Newhouse. And under the stewardship of our editor, Rusty Reno, we continue that legacy today. So very briefly, I just want to thank Hillsdale, Norberg Wealth Management, and Reinstating for being the sponsors of this. And again, as a Hillsdale alum, I'm very glad to be here and partnered with the college for this particular event. Without further ado, I'll bring up our editor, Rusty Reno.
Thanks, and welcome everyone. And I want to underscore Matteo's thanks to the folks who sponsored this lecture. We really owe them a debt of gratitude for that. And it's really great to be in this beautiful space. This is recently renovated, and I think this is one of the first events that Hillsdale D.C. has hosted in this space, and we're really grateful for their hospitality tonight. And finally, before I introduce our speaker, I should just say that all the smart people are reading First Things, and that therefore everyone in this room should be a subscriber. And if you're not, we have an easy way downstairs for you to, do the QR code, sign up, get a subscription to First Things. It's really worth it. Mary Harrington is a mother. She is a writer for Unheard and for First Things Magazine and many other outlets. She's the author of Feminism Against Progress. And as one friend of mine said to me, Mary is what she recommends to many young people. She is a feral academic, unburdened by the limitations and debilitations of academia, the university setting, this wonderful institution, of course, accepted. And her lecture tonight is Our Crisis is Metaphysical. So please join me in welcoming Mary Harrington.
Wow, so many of you. This is wonderful. Thank you so much to Rusty and Matteo for bringing me here, and to Hillsdale for hosting us, and the sponsors, obviously, for making it all possible. It's really wonderful to see so many of you here. It's a massive, massive honor. Amazing. So I want to talk tonight about, I'll start with the banned books meme, the trope of banned books. Most of you will be familiar with the banned books list, which are where the books aren't actually banned. Titles like The Handmaid's Tale or To Kill a Mockingbird, that actually they make everybody read, they're not banned at all. Then there's the actually banned books, such as certain terrorism manuals that will get you 10 years in a British prison for just owning it. And then there's a third category of books that isn't exactly banned, in that it's easy enough to get a copy, but in the sense that if you quote the ideas or imply that you think the author should be treated as a thinker of note, you'll be dismissed as unserious, worryingly ideological, maybe even morally suspect. I mean, the most obvious title on this list is Mein Kampf. There are many more. But one of the less obvious is the Summa Theologia of St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, before you all get mad at me and start throwing things, I'm not suggesting that there's any moral equivalence between these two texts. But I'm a journalist, and in my experience, if you want people to read you, you have to calibrate whatever it is that you want to say against what your implied audience can be assumed to take for granted and what needs to be said more carefully in order not to upset people or derail the argument. And I can tell you that in my experience, outside a few specialist outlets where I can make different assumptions about the audience, citing St. Thomas Aquinas requires as much care and contextualization as citing Hitler. Okay, don't throw things at me, please. I am emphatically not drawing a moral equivalence. I also realize that this is probably one of those specialist contexts where I can make different assumptions. I'm willing to bet that extremely well-read Catholics are probably unusually well represented in this room. This is a subgroup that forms perhaps the sole exceptions to an omertà that I've come to think of informally as the no Aquinas rule. or more forcefully, tomophobia. If that's you and you're puzzled by what I'm saying, let me assure you, your filter bubble is unusual. There exists a set of assumptions about the nature of reality that is, to you, obvious. Assumptions from which a great many consequences flow, of foundational importance to all kinds of contemporary debates, as apparently diverse as bioethics and high school athletics. They are all assumptions that, were we able to cite St. Thomas as casually as one can cite, say, John Locke, it would be easy enough to ground, but you can't, or rather I can't, at least in my ordinary journalistic work, because outside this subgroup, present company, the moment you cite St. Thomas Aquinas, people stop listening. Game over. Trust me, it's real. So I want first to persuade anyone here that doesn't already know what I mean about that the no Aquinas rule is real. Then I want to set out some of the ideas it elides, talk a little bit about how we got there, I think, and show how profound an epistemological straitjacket this actually is. Then I'm going to go off the deep end, maybe get into trouble, on speculating about how we could find a way out. First, though, I should explain how I stumbled on this line of thought, by trying to make sense of the mother-shaped blind spot. People don't see mums, as a rule. Again, present company accepted. It's wonderful that there are so many mums here. I love it when there are babies at my talks, especially when they're right up front. Hi, little guys. But I live kind of up in my head, in case it's not obvious. So you can maybe imagine what a record scratch moment it was for me when I became a mum, aged 38. My body was all of a sudden porous and unruly. And so were my thoughts and my feelings. And my heart and my time were no longer my own. Compared to my rather abstract former world, it felt like being brusquely and wonderfully remade. Being a nerd, once the shock wore off, it gave me lots more to think about. Two related questions puzzled me. One, why are mothers so invisible and treated so routinely as second-class persons, when the human species literally cannot continue without us? And two, why is it so difficult to talk about what mothering is? The answers I arrived at for question one would in time form the argument of feminism against progress, that the deprecation of mothering has developed in tandem with technological modernity and as a byproduct of its distinctive worldview. I argued further that when we turned the technological paradigm upon ourselves in the 20th century, this had further unanticipated consequences for women. I'll pick this theme up again a bit later. But for now, let's just stick a pin in this intuition, that there exists a tension between the reality of embodied sex and the ambitions of a civilization and worldview predicated on the pursuit of technological mastery. Question two was more of a head-scratcher. What is it that mothering is? It's comparatively easy to evoke imagistically. The canonical image of the Madonna and Child is one sacred expression of a phenomenon that is about as close to a human universal as we get. The devoted, highly attuned interdependence of a mother and her young child. Don't feel like you have to go, please. Just give her a bounce. A little bounce. Don't feel like you have to go, please. But the words keep slipping away. Most stay-at-home mums have fielded the question, what do you actually do all day? Or they've heard people thinking it, and felt sure they're doing something, but also struggled to explain what that something is. The best I was able to come up with is that mothering happens in the world of patterns, of interdependence, normativity. And that's already the inverse of the stuff we think of as meaningful. The everyday, routine, predictable stuff is just noise. The stuff that happens occasionally, that's signal, that's what matters. The stuff you do every day is just noise. But most of mothering happens in the world of noise. When your whole purpose is enabling the normal, healthy development of a baby, a good day is one in which nothing unexpected happens. But our whole culture is geared to noticing the exception, the misfit, the signal. Mothering is the inverse, the noise. Why? I kept coming back to the same weirdly missing vocabulary, first on mothering, and then on other subjects as well. It would go something like this. I would find myself reaching for words to explain and defend the existence and value of human patterns that are normally the case. For example, it's normally the case that mothers love their babies and feel an urge to protect and nurture them. Instead, I'd find myself litigating whether or not anything about humans is ever normal. Or I'd find myself struggling to point out the obvious fact that the totality of what a baby is can't be understood just by listing the attributes of that baby in that exact moment. You have to think of the baby through time as well, over the course of his or her whole maturational arc, and hold that whole four-dimensional picture in your mind, which, in turn, rests on being able to point to the existence of developmental patterns that are normally the case, which is a thing I also don't have words for. And without any of these words, I have no way of explaining why a man can't be a mother, or indeed a woman, any more than a dog can be a cat, because men are a different kind of human, at a level I also don't have words for. For a lover of words, such as I, finding myself so regularly stumped was both unusual and really aggravating. It's doubly aggravating when your lack of vocabulary is being weaponized by the other side to argue, for example, that it's fine for males who say they're women to compete in women's sports, and it's okay to make kids do wrong-sex puberty, or even that we don't know what a woman is. By degrees, this came to seem not a political difficulty so much as a deep metaphysical one. Over the time I've spent obsessing about this weird dead spot in my vocabulary, I've found it affects issues well beyond mothers, or even gender politics. For example, it shows up in our artistic values, in how we do public order, and at scale, in our relationship to the natural world. I decided it was too big to tackle in Feminism Against Progress, whose focus is the political effect of the mother-shaped blind spot. It's there in one quick line about how the question of whether technology has limits turns on a fundamental question, whether or not men and women have a nature as such. There I just said, in my view, we do, and left it at that. That's kind of cheating. I've spent the years since hunting for that missing vocabulary. I didn't find it until last summer, when an academic friend, they're not all, some non-feral academics, really good, an academic friend advised me to read Edward Feser's Introduction to Scholastic Metaphysics. Now, I don't think Professor Feser intended it as a page-turner, but I tore through it like it was an airport novel. Pretty much every page came with an, "Oh, I see," moment. It was like having spent years trying to do electrical engineering with an old spoon and half a brick, only to be gifted a set of precisely machined tools. At that point, I realised the vocabulary I thought was missing is not missing at all. It exists, but is little known, except in circles such as maybe this one. Few of you will be surprised by the big reveal, it's not really a surprise, that what I was looking for was actually Aristotelian metaphysics, as adapted by medieval theologians, among whom the greatest and long the most influential was St. Thomas Aquinas. In the Summa, Thomas reconciled Aristotle's metaphysics with Christian theology, a remarkable achievement that set the terms for serious inquiry into the nature of things, pretty much from Thomas's day to the 17th century. I'm not qualified to summarise the Summa, but I am indebted to Professor Feser, and behind him the scholastics, and especially St. Thomas, for three tools that speak to the concepts I'd found so frustratingly missing in my writing work, and in the political discourse more generally. The first of these is the distinction between potency and act. Act describes what something is right now. Potency comprises all those other things it could be, based on the kind of thing it is. Returning to a baby, all these wonderful babies, we might say they're an infant in act, but an adult in potency. There's a bit more to maturation than just potency, which we'll get into with the third missing tool. But in general, we can understand potency as the thing something could become, given the kind of thing it is. A calf could become a bull, or it could become dinner, but it couldn't become a retractable pencil. So the second is a distinction between substance and accident. I've referred a few times in this talk so far to the kind of thing something is. Substantial form is basically a more succinct way of saying this. The substantial form of a thing organises what it is. The catness of a cat, dogness of a dog, or the humanness of a human. Another term sometimes used in this context is essence. Substantial form is the essence of a thing. Accident, by contrast, is an attribute that can vary without making it a different kind of thing. For example, a cat can be black or ginger or bob-tailed and still be a cat. But if it has flippers or scales, it's a different kind of thing. The last is the idea of fourfold causality. This is so alien to the way we're taught to understand the world that I hope those of you who are familiar with this idea will bear with me when I try and explain. Cause and effect today is generally treated as linear, usually physical. For example, a cue hits a billiard ball, that pings into a group of other balls, the balls roll around the table. This account of cause and effect can be complicated on its own, but at its core, it rests on two kinds of cause that make something what it is, the stuff and the forces. But I found this older metaphysics has a less linear and less material understanding of causation, that sees a thing as caused not only by stuff and forces, but also the kind of thing it is, its substantial form, and what it's for, the ends to which it's directed, conventionally its final cause, or telos. So even though the bull calf, in my example, could become dinner or a handbag. Its telos, or final cause, is neither of these things, but is intrinsic to the kind of thing it is. Its final cause is to become an adult bull. Finally, and to make more bulls, that's also important. Cows, cattle. Finally, and as we'll see, importantly, material cause, what we think of as the substance of a thing, its stuff, is inseparable from formal cause. The technical term is hylomorphism, from hyle, meaning matter, and morphe, meaning form. Things are what they are because they're both. This is a whole rabbit hole on its own, which is way above my pay grade. But the basic idea is that physical stuff doesn't exist on its own, and only in as much as it's informed by essence. That goes for us as much as the world around us, with the special extra consideration that for humans, in this framework, the form of the body is the soul. So I went looking for language. I mean, this is a lot. You know, you've got to imagine me here, this is a lot. I went looking for language to talk about aspects of mothering that felt real and difficult to describe. And I found them in a metaphysical worldview that is comprehensive, coherent, and stable for several centuries. And now, it's as though that whole worldview has just been memory holed. It's just, literally, unless outside certain circles, it's just not there. People skip over it and pretend it's just like it never happened. It's the strangest thing. So what did happen? This has been puzzling me for some time. And why my persistent sense that this way of thinking is not just forgotten, but banned. This story has been told by more erudite thinkers than I am. I mean, we could join Richard Weaver in blaming it all on William of Ockham. Or we could blame the printing press, fanning the flames of Protestantism and undercutting the university centres of scholastic thought. Was it the scientific revolution? Was that a cause or an effect? I don't know. Should we be provocative and blame the Christian doctrine of incarnation itself for making theology reckon with the physical world, instead of just hoping to escape it like the Buddhists? I don't know. Maybe not. The story of how we became modern by discarding form and telos can be sliced a dozen different ways. And whatever its causality, you can see the beginning taking shape in Reformation-era theological battles over the doctrine of transubstantiation. That is, whether Christ, the Word made flesh, is really present in the consecrated host. It wasn't until I discovered the older meaning of substance that the dispute even made sense at all. It was one of those, oh, I see moments. The idea is not that the material of the host changes, but only its substantial form. Luther called this a monstrous word for a monstrous idea. And the doctrine was banned in England in 1563, under the 39 Articles, under Elizabeth I. Even in Catholic Europe, the Council of Trent upheld the dogma in the late 16th century, but abandoned the Aristotelian foundation. Around that time, then, even among believing Catholics, the capacity to comprehend substance in this way seems to have been fading. It may be that by the time Francis Bacon's Novum Organum argued in 1620 that natural philosophy should set aside form and telos, he was only saying what was already on everybody's minds. And this is also perhaps ground zero for that sense of Thomas as not just forgotten, but banned. He kind of was, in England at least. Elizabeth banned transubstantiation. And from the late 17th to the late 19th century in England, the Test Acts forbade anyone to hold public office in England without explicitly, verbally denying this doctrine. It's not hard to see how this might extend to a proscription on the idea of substance in general. The ban was pursued intellectually as well as politically, not just in England. Descartes, Hobbes, Spinoza, Locke, Hume, all of them wrote against the scholastics. Pierre Manin has argued, since the 17th century, more or less the entirety of modern philosophy has in fact been a war on scholastic metaphysics. The concept of substance, the notion that there exists a hierarchy of substances or forms, and that the human soul has as the form of the body. Pierre Manin puts it in The City of Man, that man is a substance, and one substance. That is the Carthago delenda of the new philosophy. To be born at all, then, the modern world had to bury Aristotle and St. Thomas. To be modern meant first bracketing, and then, in time, discarding act and potency, substance and accident, formal and final cause. From a stance of studied agnosticism towards the nature or directedness of anything, we could instead learn whatever there was to learn about the world through observation, analysis, measurement, and experiment. The writer Yuval Noah Harari described thus the effects of this move. Modernity is a surprisingly simple deal, in which mankind agreed to give up meaning in exchange for power. If we understand meaning as the what and the why, forms and ends, act and potency, this is precisely right. Discarding that older metaphysics shifted the purpose of human activity, and especially of intellectual inquiry, away from the contemplation of God in his creation, towards the control and instrumentalization of that creation. As Charles Taylor has shown, bracketing God's presence in the world gave way, in time, to his presumed disappearance. Increasingly, our activity in the world is understood to have no end beyond, as Bacon put it, the relief of man's estate, or as in Descartes' framing, to render us masters and possessors of nature. In other words, we gave up seeing the meaning of the world in exchange for power over it. What's so intriguing about this trajectory is that until quite late in the picture, it remained a Christian one. Luther wasn't trying to expunge God from the world, but to renew our relation to him. Hobbes may have reframed human society in terms of a single motivating force and external fear, power, but he wasn't trying to abolish God, nor was Descartes. But the habitual opposition in the new science to the old metaphysics has become so habitual that no one even knows that they're walking over the graves of Aristotle and Aquinas to attain it. This amnesia is all the more understandable in that the rewards have been abundant and indeed are all around us today. Perhaps the closest we get to feeling uncomfortable about the trade-offs of exchanging meaning for power is when we're confronted with its side effects: pollution, strip-mined landscapes, depleted ecosystems, invisible mothers. The suffering of other species we've reordered as stuff, so as to exert our power over them, regardless of their own nature, as for example in lab experiments or factory farming. We were all more or less okay doing without formal and final cause when it was just stuff out there in the world. We might feel intuitively that it's not quite right that a pig is merely atoms arranged pigwise, and would not substantially differ, at least in the modern sense of substantial, were these atoms arranged deli meat-wise. But it's not us being rearranged at the end of the day. So what happens when the same logic comes for people? Are we just atoms arranged human-wise? Drawing on Taylor, we can see how this conclusion is another eventual corollary of God's withdrawal from his creation. This prompted, Taylor argues, a corresponding shift in our account of the soul, from the medieval view of the soul as a form of the body, to Locke's punctual self, existing only as a single point, one instant after another, and then, in due course, to the rationalist's ghost in the machine, and latterly, the still more ambiguous self, whatever that means. As the theologian Angela Franks has shown, this also owed something to the solvent power of Christian theology in working individuals free of the givens of their lives. But a further corollary of this retreat from seeing ourselves in terms of form and ends has been the temptation to apply the Baconian mindset to ourselves. This was, in fact, my entry point into this whole inquiry. In Feminism Against Progress, I argued that the point at which we began in earnest to technologize ourselves was the contraceptive pill. This was distinct from previous medical innovations in the sense that it set out not to cure illness, but normal human health. You don't take the pill in hope of being restored to a more perfect expression of your substantial form and telos, but to cure the former with the aim of severing the sexual act from the latter. As I reflected on this, it felt obvious that there exists a healthy human normal that comes in two sexes and whose stable reality is the foundational premise of all medical interventions up to the pill. It also seemed to me that there's a difference in kind between medicines that seek to bring someone closer to that normal and this one, which set out to interrupt, co-opt, or otherwise reorder that normal for the relief of man's estate, or simply to relief men's estate, really, or simply to serve individual preference. Having realised this, it then struck me how many post-pill medical, cultural and political innovations, from transgender medicine to gestational surrogacy, are predicated on the same refusal to see human form and human ends. The basic aspiration is to become, as Descartes put it, masters and possessors of nature, including our own human nature. The central move is against the metaphysical ground of our own existence. Struggling for words to describe this, I argued myself, by degrees, from feminism to where you find me today, doing metaphysics with my L plates still on. I don't know, do Americans even have L plates? I don't know, that's the plate you put on the back of your car when you're not very good at driving yet. I coined the term meat Lego as a means of foregrounding the instinctive revulsion we all feel at the proposition that the material human body is not informed by substance. To the meat Lego mindset, we're merely atoms arranged human-wise, and arranging those otherwise would be morally neutral. Of course, then you quickly get into trouble. For example, the so-called hard problem of consciousness, or indeed the loss of anything that grounds our intuitions that humans have intrinsic dignity, or that it's morally wrong to try and re-engineer the human form. Since we became modern by burying Aquinas, this officially doesn't exist, which makes the intuition hard to explain. But people can still see it, much as they can see there is a real, in fact a substantial, difference between a pig and a slab of deli meat. We are, in fact, human beings, inasmuch as we are thus informed. St. Thomas would say that what informs us is our souls. But the enabling framework for the field of human re-engineering rejects the notion of form and directedness. It can then collapse substantial into accidental form and potency into act, for these things are no longer easily distinguishable. Perhaps the most egregious expression I've seen of this paradigm comes from a 2023 research paper funded by Britain's National Health Service, which asserted that trans-identified women should not be discouraged from taking synthetic testosterone while pregnant, regardless of any risks this might pose to a developing baby in utero, because to do so would simply reflect historical and ongoing social practice for creating ideal and normative bodies. Formal cause, then, in that worldview, has no ontological status outside that ascribed to it by historical and ongoing social practices. So it's made up by power. It's very Hobbesian. Any attempt to assert otherwise is not a defence of something real and important, but a disguised manoeuvre in the Hobbesian struggle for power. This is perhaps the foundational premise of the post-structuralist philosophy that legitimizes transhumanism. In Of Grammatology, Derrida links this untoward fixation with meaning deftly to the gravest of modern sins, racism. It is, he says, the most original and powerful ethnocentrism. By extension, we can infer that hewing to formal and final cause is not just, as for Bacon, an impediment to research. Now it's a moral transgression too. From Derrida on, anyone clinging to the meaning of meaning may be accused of logocentrism, an unseemly fixation with the idea that meaning might be meaningful. The implicit tomophobia becomes even clearer when we recall the accusation flung at anyone who dares to assert that sex is real and not merely a social construct, essentialism. Recall that for Thomas, essence is a basic aspect of reality. To a tomophobe, though, someone who believes this is an ideologue, probably motivated by hate and animated by a burning Hobbesian desire to oppress the weak. It is through this genealogy that we reach the current bizarre situation in which it really is the case that anyone citing Aquinas will be received, at least by tomophobes, with the same disgust that would greet someone citing Hitler. We thus come, by degrees, to the anthropology described by the theologian Angela Franks as liquid bodies and empty selves. A formless, radically malleable view of physiology, paired with an understanding of the self not as informing. Really don't feel like you have to go, it's all good. It's fine, it really is fine. Don't. Not informing, as for Thomas, but rather to be formed itself, according to individual desire. So the basic predicament is as follows. We've baconed ourselves by degrees from the relief of man's estate to losing the language for explaining what man even is, never mind woman. The logic of this trajectory and the critical impoverishment, present company accepted, of modern metaphysical vocabularies makes this difficult to dispute succinctly, but it is precisely this which is now forcing the issue. I found my way, by degrees, from the mother-shaped blind spot to the real banned books table, Thomas. I'm far from the only person who can see both that the dimension of pattern, form, act, potency is right there, and also that there are somehow no words available for naming it. Even the pervasive modern preoccupation with natural food, which has risen in direct proportion to the industrialization of the food chain, derives from this same basic intuition, that our food is also made of something else, in addition to the atoms, however these are arranged. In the same way, most people intuit correctly that we're made of something, in addition to our atoms. But the tomophobic epistemological straitjacket, now there's a sentence, makes the case for realism difficult to argue with any precision. And this is a problem. It obliges us to argue for the directedness of sex difference without reference to final cause, to argue against the artificial disordering of normal child development without reference to act and potency, to dispute the legitimacy of seeking to re-engineer normative physiology without distinguishing substance from accident. My early intuition was right. There really is a tension between technological modernity and the reality of sexed embodied human life. But really, so-called gender medicine was the canary in the coal mine. As many of the noises are coming from inside the right-wing house as from the goblin left. And it might be easy enough to challenge transhumanist interventions when it's progressives collapsing potency into act, so they can say it's fine for a child to undergo wrong-sex puberty. But what do we do when our two gay friends buy a baby? Awkward. Or when our based tech friends want to re-engineer the human template so we can live forever, or gene-edit embryos to increase IQ. The same difficulties apply too, in spades, once we get to the contemporary question of artificial intelligence. You'll recall a little way back, I left a narrative thread hanging on the so-called hard problem of consciousness. That is, the paradox thrown up by reasoning ourselves into the soul's impossibility and then finding ourselves still experiencing the world from a vantage point whose simplest explanation we have already foreclosed. From inside this paradigm, built like the other edifices of scientific modernity over the graves of Aristotle and Aquinas, it is likewise difficult to advance any reason why we should consider a machine capable of passing the Turing test as meaningfully different from a thinking human being. If humans are, besides, simply atoms arranged person-wise, it follows that there are no grounds either to make a formal distinction between training an AI and raising a human child. So recently, we saw the AI founder Sam Altman assert in an interview with the Indian journalist Anant Goenka that people talk about how much energy it takes to train an AI model, but it also takes a lot of energy to train a human. It takes like 20 years of life and all the food you eat during that time before you get smart. Of course, this only makes sense from a tomophobic perspective. From a realist one, the difference between a child and an AI is obvious. One of them, the child, is organised by a substantial form, while the other is, like all man-made objects, accidental. They're different in kind. Only one meets the definition of human being, namely rational animal, and that is not going to change just because your AI gets better at mimicking humans. Imagining you can infuse a machine with a soul has it precisely backwards. Our bodies are as they are because they're informed by our souls. None of this is to say that AI is not capable of astonishing feats. So too is biotech. The important thing is not to get confused about what is amenable to engineering and how, and what is just reasoning from incomplete premises. To be clear, I don't think the end goal of transhumanism is possible. We may be able to engineer accidental changes, but the human form is not amenable to alteration through Baconian technology. That's just a complete mistake of category. It's literally like trying to do electrical engineering with a spoon. It doesn't make sense. Consider, even the most noisily trans-inclusive person still knows exactly what a woman is when they want to procure a baby. Everyone's just pretending they can't see it. Nor, for the same reason, is it possible to give a computer a soul. From the Thomist perspective, the proposition is self-evidently daft. But I can see we're going to work this all out painfully, the hard way. That means we'll try, and we'll create victims. There are already too many regretful young adults who outgrew a youthful trans identity, but whose bodies will be scarred forever, thanks to enablers in schools and clinics who were simply unable or unwilling to say no. Your form is what it is. Or you create monsters. How many trans shooters is it now? As for AI, we are barely into the foothills of the ways still more of us will get burned by interacting with LLMs as though they're rational animals. Again, this is not to say biotech cannot achieve marvellous things, or AI prove helpful as a tool for extending human thought. It is possible to sustain both a scientific programme and also a metaphysical framework that reads the missing categories back into the overall picture. Indeed, I suspect we will not get much further with scientific knowledge until we do. That is, until we restore the ultimate ground on which, if we're honest, we never stopped interacting with the world. This brings me to the second issue I ducked in Feminism Against Progress. There was a lot of cheating in the background. There, I realised, even if I didn't have the words, that my argument turned on the existence of humans as a substantial form, stable over time, even if it's difficult to explain why from inside a physicalist worldview. In that book, I left human nature as a mystery, in the medieval sense of something that just is. But having argued myself to the conclusion that these metaphysical substances are real, in some sense that is plainly right there, even if it's not empirical, under that is yet another can of worms. If formal cause is real, in what sense is this so? Where does it reside? And what is its origin? Of course, St. Thomas had plenty to say about this. In his view, at the ground of everything there has to be an uncaused cause, or else the world would be, as the postmodernists say it is, infinite regress without truth or meaning. The logical necessity of this uncaused cause served, for Aquinas, as one of the proofs of God. Is it cheating, then, to say this is also a mystery, that it just is? I don't think so. After all, it just is really just another way of saying uncaused cause. I don't think it's cheating. I think it just is. So we're now a very long way from the mother-shaped blind spot. I started out trying to get a grip on feminism, expanded that to transhumanism, and have ended up reverse engineering bits of pre-modern metaphysics. with my old plates on. In this, as it turns out, I am not an innovator. Back in the 60s, for example, around the time the pill was launched, the theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg suggested that making sense of quantum physics would require reinstating the Aristotelian ideas of act and potency. If it's good enough for him, then it's good enough for me. Even in my unskilled hands, the tools work a lot better than that rusty spoon and the half a brick. But now, the internal logic of these tools has brought me to this conclusion. As a corollary of this framework, God just is. What am I to do with that? In for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. If I'm retrieving ideas from St. Thomas, I might as well go the whole hog and see what the Bible itself has to say about the uncaused cause. And what I found there is, I think, both the invitation into our contemporary metaphysical, technological crisis, and also perhaps a signpost for the way out of it. The invitation lies in the developing account of creation between Old and New Testament, and Christ shows us the way out in his response to temptation in the desert. I'm indebted to the classical scholar Spencer Clavin for explaining to me that ancient Hebrew does not use tenses like modern English. So where the English version says, "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth," Clavin offers as an English approximation of the more temporally ambiguous original, "At the origin, God, creating heaven and earth." In other words, a work of creation that is the origin, but which is also always active and always complete. I read this, and then I look around me at the world, just now springing back into life after winter, and it's easy to see at the origin God, creating heaven and creating earth, creating form and creating matter. Then, in the Gospel of John, we find a deliberate echo of this creation story and an elaboration of it. In the beginning was the Word. Now, it's the speech of God, creating heaven and creating earth. And then John continues with the central mystery of Christian faith, in particular, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us." So when you put these pieces together, you have the picture of God, the uncaused cause, the ground of all creation, incarnate on earth as the Word made flesh. This extraordinary incarnation in human form opened space first for the scholastic inquiry into God's presence in the material world, the great theological works on the soul as well, and finally, in revolt against the schoolmen, a Baconian account of the world that bracketed that sense of its being thus informed. Since then, we've gained power in proportion to our willingness to continue not seeing God at the origin, creating heaven and creating earth. By and large, we've accepted the trade-offs, as long as these were external to us, ruined ecosystems, suffering lab animals, and so on. But as we've moved on the same trajectory from seeking mastery over the world to applying this paradigm to ourselves, it has followed that we must also discard human form and human directedness, and we have been trying. But stubborn intuition, plus some fierce gender-critical mums, continue to exist that, nope, we can't actually do this. Now, we can draw these threads together. If the incarnation opened a door that led, by degrees, to our pretending the world is only made of atoms, this too was anticipated, this time not in John but Matthew. It's a fitting reference, actually, Christ's 40 days in the wilderness. It's a seasonal reference. Matthew recounts that when Jesus got hungry, the devil tempted him, saying, "If you're the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." And Jesus refused, saying, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And I think perhaps we could understand this exchange and the temptation on offer as not just about food, but honouring the form of the world. The devil coaxes Jesus to gratify his hunger by doing something that precisely inverts the Eucharist, understood in the terms banned by Elizabeth in the 16th century. Transubstantiation was understood as a change in the form of the bread, but not its matter. Here the devil invites Jesus to do the opposite, rearrange the rock's matter so it's bread, without any regard for its form. He says, in effect, these atoms are arranged stonewise, and you could slake your hunger by using your power to rearrange them breadwise. Jesus says, no, man lives not just by bread, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. In the light of John, it's a refusal to see matter as just matter, but as always informed by logos, by the word of God. Importantly as well, Jesus makes clear it's not either or, but yes and, not bread alone, but also logos. More than an argument about dinner, what the devil is inviting Jesus to do is give up meaning, logos, in exchange for power. Specifically, the power to do as he pleases to our matter, and never mind the violence this visits on form. What I take from this is that our current crisis, our refusal to see what's right there, our uncompromising physicalism, and the way it leaves us critically vulnerable to the depredations of technologies that whisper to us about transcending our own forms or teaching sand to think, it was all expected. And Jesus' temptation in the desert warns us about what awaits should we try and follow this logic all the way down. We don't live by bread alone. Logically, if we try and live by bread alone, and not logos, we will not live. I think it's not a coincidence that we've stopped having babies in that paradigm. We don't live by bread alone. Unless they're sufficiently stupefied by education, people generally understand this. This is why people are suspicious of ultra-processed food. What we eat is not just molecules, but also substantial form. The same goes when people recoil from gender mutilation or from extreme genetic engineering. No matter how the social penalties increase for noticing that mothers and babies are directed to one another, and human sexual desire is not really body agnostic, people can still see it. No matter what the law says in California, humans still can't change sex. The same intuition powers revulsion at, for example, the prospect of human-animal chimeras. The same goes as well for the noise about conscious AI. This delusion is predicated on the same carefully cultivated metaphysical blind spot, and mostly functions as a distraction from the much more important and politically urgent question of how we can use it rightly as a tool, or not. That's why those haters of logocentrism have to smear the logos as bigotry and make essentialism a thought crime. The word is right there, all around us, all the time. We're rightly growing alarmed at the implications of further pursuing this order that we unleashed, and that would proceed on the basis of its non-existence, even into the ground of human existence. The closer that world looms, the more urgently people have begun looking for the ideas we buried in order to embark on this adventure, to begin with. We just need to stop pretending that we can't see what's right in front of us. The warning was always there. We need it to live. So was the message. Jesus could have made stone into bread, but chose not to violate reality, just to fill his belly. Instead, he made bread into his own body, to fill our hearts. If we want to survive this age of dissolution, we should take the hint. We should share the bread and remember how to attend to the word. Along the way, it's my hope that we might relearn the language for what mothering is. Thank you.